Who can tell me how people have voted in the past? Anyone? Just shout it out.
The computer things.
Yeah, so we'll count, we'll put right here as 2018. Computerized electronic voting started around mid-2000, and real electronic voting, what we know now today, started 2006. Yes?
There's a hole punching.
So yeah, that was between, so we'll put this 1900. The punch card machines you said?
Yeah.
Those are in about this time right here. Any other ways?
Piece of paper and a couple of blocks.
Yeah, so in around 1800s, from here, we used ballots. And we also, in our earlier times, we used something called viva voce, which is spoken voice votes. So what about voting scandals? Can you think of anything that's happened throughout history that's a scandal and voting?
There was a hanging Chad in like 2000 election.
The 2000 election, that was the Bush v. Gore with the Florida recount. So that was right here. Anything else? We're living through one right now.
Russia period.
Yep. All right. So how to vote. A ballot is the medium by which a voter registers their choice in an election. In early voting, many states have streamlined this process of early voting with the use of absentee voting. A qualified voter can fill out an absentee ballot without offering an excuse, and this is called a no-excuse absentee ballot. 41% of all votes cast in the 2016 election were actually cast before Election Day. Absentee ballot is the process by which a person can vote without going to their specific polling place. I'm going to be using this during the 2020 election because I will be living at Purdue during November instead of back home in Tennessee. And the first forms of absentee voting came during the Civil War so that troops could vote in the election of 1864. And the third way people vote is just in person. That's when you go up to the computer, you're in the little booth, and you vote at the polling place. Where to vote? A precinct is basically just a voting district. It's the smallest geographical unit for elections, ranging from about 500 to 1,000 people. And a polling place is where people actually vote. Polling places on election day are open 12 hours from either 7 a.m., 7 p.m., 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. See if you guys recognize any of these polling places around the area. St. Lawrence Social Hall, Lafayette City Hall, Eagles Lodge, and James Rest Senior Center. How people have voted. In today's elections, it's state law that ballots be cast in secret, but in early American history, American votes were a little bit more public. Like I said earlier, in the 1800s, viva voce is an early form of voting with spoken votes. Voting was done in a public place where voters said their votes to an election board. Many defended this type of voting because it let all that wanted to vote actually vote. But voting quickly became only for white males with property. Paper ballots is basically just voting done on paper. General use of paper ballots was in place by the mid-1800s. In early elections, slips of paper were provided by the voters themselves and then put in ballot boxes. Though with the use of ballots, corruption was on the rise, and this led, and the post-civil war years, this led many to ask for ballot reform. The Australian ballot. In 1856, the people of Victoria, Australia tried a new system for ballots. And with the need for reform evident in the United States, we took some pointers from their election. The Australian ballot had 4 main features. It was provided at public expense. It listed all candidates' names in the election. It was given out only at marked polling stations, 1 to each qualified voter, and the ballot could be marked in secret. We took this idea and we use it in our elections every time we elect people to offices. Sample ballots and bedsheet ballots. Sample ballots are listed candidates that registered voters can receive before an election. Basically, just a practice run for voters. Just like a study guide you guys would fill out for a test in Mr. Pugh's class or a science class that you have. Like I said, just a dry run to prepare for the upcoming election. The sample ballot can be mailed in, it can be found in newspapers, and now it can be found online. And bedsheet ballots are the common term used to describe American ballots because it's just so long and there's so many offices to vote on. And this is because the mentality that Americans had early in our country is the more elected offices there were, the more democratic the government was. How votes are counted. Votes have been counted by hand, voting machines, electronic voting machines with punch cards, and machines that use EDPs, popularly known as electronic data processing. Machines with punch cards played a major role in the drama during the election of 2000, and this led to the Help America Vote Act, which eliminated, or tried to eliminate, punch card voting machines. Does anyone have any questions so far? Am I going too fast or anything? Okay. The coattail effect. This occurs when a strong candidate running for office at the top of the ballot attracts voters to other candidates on the party ticket. The coattail effect can also do the opposite if the candidate is unliked. So, for example, when Barack Obama won his presidency in 2008, his coattail effect picked up 20 new Democrats into the House. Or 21, my bad. Political machines and voting corruption. So we're on to some history now. William Tweed, aka Boss Tweed, was a Democratic politician known for being the boss of Tammany Hall in New York. Boss Tweed himself said, "As long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it?" And a political boss, like he said himself, is one who controls the votes. Political bosses would also help immigrants with naturalization and jobs in exchange for votes. So you see how sleazy he is. And a political machine is a political group in which an authoritative boss or small group commands the support of a core of supporters and businesses who receive rewards for their efforts. Political machines allow for all kinds of corruption, including voter fraud, patronage, graft, and kickbacks. Fraud is when a person votes under a fake name or votes multiple times. Patronage is granting favors in return for votes. Grafts are using bribes to gain political support, and kickbacks are the return of money in exchange for business. It is estimated that Tweed's ring stole $20 to $400 million from the New York government. Is everyone good on this? All right, this is a political cartoon drawn by Thomas Nast, a famous political cartoonist. It says on the bottom, "The Tammany Tiger loose. What are you going to do about it?" Obviously playing on the words when he said, "I count the votes. What are you going to do about it?" This one's pretty obvious. He's a fat, greedy man, money on the mind. And here's another. He's basically putting himself in front of the ballot just because he's very corrupt. The reason Thomas Nast's political cartoons were so effective in pointing out corruption is because Even those who couldn't read saw that he was a bad and corrupt man. Tweed was reported in saying, "Stop them damn pictures, I don't care what the papers say about me. My constituents don't know how to read, but they can't help seeing the damn pictures." The excessive corruption led to ballot reform in the late 1800s and the use of new voting machines and new counting methods. Winner take all, Bush v. Gore. Bush v. Gore in 2000 was a decision of the United States Supreme Court that settled a recount dispute in Florida's 2000 presidential election. On election night, it was unclear who had won, with the electoral votes of the state of Florida still undecided. The returns showed that Bush had won Florida by such a close margin that state law actually required a recount. And we're going to watch this video explaining what went down.
The U.S. presidential election of 2000 was one of the closest and most controversial elections in American history. Then, Vice President Al Gore ran against Texas Governor George W. Bush, the son of former President George H.W. Bush. Both were high-profile figures with opposing political views. The campaign season was tense. That tension all came to a head on election night, leading to one of the most unusual outcomes in history: a presidency secured by a Supreme Court ruling in Bush v. Gore. It was Tuesday, November 7th, 2000. The race was close all night. Americans were glued to their television sets. 1 minute Gore was in the lead, the next Bush was set to win. But soon, one fact became crystal clear. The election came down to whoever would win the most votes in the state of Florida. But why did Florida matter so much? In the U.S., presidential elections are not determined by the popular vote. Instead, we use a system called the Electoral College. Each state is designated a set amount of electoral votes, roughly based on their populations. In the year 2000, a highly populated state like California had 54 electoral votes, and the much less populated Delaware had 3. The candidate who gets the most votes in each state gains all of the electoral votes. There are 538 electoral votes in all, and it takes at least 270 to win the presidency. But in 2000, neither candidate had enough electoral votes to clinch the presidency. Gore only had 255. Bush had 246. So it all came down to Florida's 25 electoral votes. Whoever won the state of Florida would take the presidency. But here's where things get tricky. When the polls finally closed in Florida, the results were just too close to call, which automatically triggered a recount by machine. When that was finished the day after the election, Bush had a small lead of about 900 popular votes out of 6 million ballots cast. Such a narrow margin allowed Gore to demand a recount by hand in 4 crucial counties. This meant that they'd count the votes in all those counties all over again. The Florida Secretary of State, a Republican, who had also worked on Bush's campaign, insisted that this recount be completed by November 14th. The Gore campaign wanted more time, so they petitioned the Florida Supreme Court. The court extended the recount deadline to November 26th. But only 2 counties made it. 1 county gave up trying, and the 4th finished 2 hours late and was not allowed to hand in its tally. Still, with just 2 counties recounts, Bush's lead had shrunk even further. It was now just about 500 votes. So the Florida Supreme Court granted the Gore campaign's request for a larger recount of 70,000 questionable ballots. But then the recount revealed a problem: balloting methods. In some Florida counties, votes were cast using a hole punch. But if the hole wasn't punched properly, the machine wouldn't count it. In Palm Beach County alone, 29,000 ballots were found spoiled and discarded, either because they were properly punched or because multiple candidates were voted for on the same ticket, presumably by mistake. Al Gore insisted that ignoring votes means ignoring democracy itself. It was now 19 days past Election Day, and a winner still had not been declared. At this point, the United States Supreme Court intervened and halted the recount. By a 5-4 vote, the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately ordered the recount be stopped, arguing that a recount of only some ballots violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. But of course, given the variety of balloting systems, counting all votes by the same standard was impossible. Technically, the U.S. Supreme Court let Florida Supreme Court still have the final say, but there was little left for that court to do but dismiss the case. The court conceded, and Bush was awarded the electoral votes and declared president. However, the Supreme Court's ruling did not appease war supporters. Many Americans saw the narrow majority vote of the Supreme Court as being split along partisan lines. 5 justices favoring the Republican, 4 the Democrat. Critics would later claim bitterly that Al Gore lost the election by a margin of just 1 vote in the Supreme Court. Gore was the first presidential candidate in 112 years to lose the electoral vote, but win the popular vote, with a total of almost 550,000 more votes over Bush. It would be 16 years before what was happened again in the 2016 presidential election of Donald Trump. Trump won the electoral vote and lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton by a margin of 2.9 million votes. In the end, Bush became president and served 2 terms. Gore continued his political life as an advocate for action against climate change. Meanwhile, Americans continue to debate the efficacy of the U.S. electoral system and voting procedures across each state.
Alright, so who do you guys think really won this election? Do you think Gore could have had a chance if the votes were counted correctly?
Publicly. It's kind of hard to judge because there's so many different methods of voting. And so, like with the punch card, if you punch someone's name, but you didn't need to do that, then that could be kind of the same as like if someone wrote down the wrong name on a piece of paper.
See, there was a ton of different ways people voted, and things weren't exactly uniform across the country, which led to problems like the 2000 election. So the fallout of Bush v. Gore led to the Help America Vote Act in 2002. This act was created to fix registration and ballot problems that plague United States elections. It had 4 major parts. Replace all lever and punch card voting devices by 2006. Something that actually most states did not hit. Most states didn't actually replace all their stuff. Upgrade administrations of the election. Workers for elections were basically untrained, low paid, and basically volunteer. Centralized and computerized voter registration systems. This was done to minimize fraudulent voting, so people that couldn't vote twice or vote under false names. And provide for provisional voting. Provisional voting is when, say, if someone's voter eligibility is put to question at the polling place, they could challenge this, prove that they actually can vote, and then prove later on, or then vote later on in time, and their vote would still count. Did Russia do it? Show of hands, who thinks Russia at least slightly meddled in our election? That's what it's starting. Most people are starting to agree that something happened. Even our U.S. government publicly announced in October of 2016 that it was confident Russia orchestrated the hacking of the Democratic National Committee and other political organizations of the Democratic Party. These hacks resulted in the public release of thousands of stolen emails, many of which included damaging revelations about the Democratic Party and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, the party's nominee. And those hacks, and this was just the beginning of findings for Russian collusion. I'm going to have John Green explain this now because he has much more information than I do, and he speaks much faster than I do.
Okay, so today I want to discuss what we know about the relationship between Donald Trump's presidential campaign and the Russian government's interference in our 2016 elections. But first, a couple notes. Russia is a huge and massively diverse country of 144 million people, but in the context of this election meddling, we are talking specifically about Vladimir Putin and his government. Russia and the U.S. are currently adversaries. Putin's regime has sought to undermine democracy and democratic institutions around the world, and in the U.S.'s view, invaded a sovereign nation. But whether the United States and Russia are friends is not actually that relevant to the legal questions at hand. Also, there is a lot of speculation about this story online. For the purposes of this video, I'm only going to refer to events that have either been confirmed by the people who participated in them or reported independently by two separate news organizations. Sources, as always, in the video info below. Okay, here we go. The Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence have stated with high confidence that the Russian government sought to influence the outcome of the U.S. presidential election favoring Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. They've also stated that Russia's leader, Vladimir Putin, personally oversaw this operation, which actually shouldn't come as that much of a surprise. The Putin regime has a history of trying to sway foreign elections, and also Trump's policy positions were broadly much more favorable to Putin than Clinton's policy positions. I mean, as far back as 2007, Trump said that Putin was doing a great job. The Trump campaign even cut proposed language from the official Republican Party platform about supporting Ukraine in their ongoing conflict with Russia. Okay, so the Putin regime meddled in our election in at least three ways: by a disinformation campaign in which they created and shared inaccurate news stories, by trying to breach election data in several states, and by hacking the Democratic National Committee and DNC leader John Podesta to access their emails, which they then released to WikiLeaks. Now, you may not believe all of that, and certainly both WikiLeaks and the Russian government deny it, but there is overwhelming agreement, not just within U.S. intelligence circles, but also among both Republican and Democratic members of Congress, who, as you may have noticed, struggle to find common ground on pretty much anything. The email hack in particular made a significant impact because it created a huge imbalance of information. The public had access to all these Democratic emails, many of which one might charitably describe as sleazy, but not to any similar Republican emails that might have existed. It's a bit like saying, can you believe all this crap in candidate X's tax returns when candidate Y doesn't release their tax returns at all? Now, you can say, and you ought to, that political parties just shouldn't be sleazy. But my point is only that it created an information imbalance, and that by choosing whose emails we saw, Putin had a lot of say in the election narrative. Of course, none of that means the election was illegitimate. It wasn't. Or that Trump didn't win. He did. And benefiting from a foreign government's propaganda initiative is not a crime. However, colluding with that government is probably. U.S. election law says that a foreign national, be they Canadian or Russian or Martian, cannot make a contribution or a donation of anything of value in connection with a U.S. election. It also says that no American can solicit or knowingly accept a donation or anything of value from a foreign national. I suspect we're going to hear the phrase thing of value a lot in the coming months, by the way, in part because the courts haven't been super clear at deciding what it means. If hypothetically you receive damning information about your opponent from a foreign national and then share that information, that is probably receiving a thing of value, but it hasn't been entirely established. And there are a lot of nuances here. Have you received a thing of value if you know about the thing and approve of sharing it, but don't share it yourself? Did you solicit a thing of value if you set up a meeting with a foreign national in the hopes they would provide something they didn't provide, etc.? So many people in Trump's campaign had past relationships with Putin's regime. Trump's one-time campaign manager, Paul Manafort, received around $30 million working for Oleg Deripaska, who is seen as one of Putin's closest business confidants. Michael Caputo, an early Trump advisor, had previously worked on a Russian campaign to improve Putin's image among Americans. Trump's Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, had to recuse himself from the Russia investigation after it was revealed he had previously undisclosed meetings with Sergei Kislyak, Russia's ambassador to the United States. And Michael Flynn, Trump's first national security advisor, failed to disclose payments that were made to him by an arm of the Russian government. And failure to disclose such payments is illegal for former military officers. Flynn also talked several times to Sergei Kislyak during the transition, the period after the election, but before Trump became president. One of those calls occurred on December 29th, which happened to be the same day the U.S. announced new sanctions on Russia. Flynn initially denied that he discussed sanctions on that call, but it became apparent that there was evidence to the contrary because Kislyak's calls are routinely monitored by U.S. intelligence. Discussing sanctions policy on that call was possibly illegal. I mean, Flynn was not yet the national security advisor, but he was trying to negotiate foreign policy. But of greater concern is that the day after Trump learned that Flynn had lied about discussing sanctions, Trump asked FBI Director James Comey for loyalty. And then, the day after Flynn eventually resigned, Trump asked Comey to drop the Flynn investigation altogether. This is alarming because in the United States, the Justice Department and the FBI are supposed to operate independently from the White House. That's part of the reason FBI directors serve a 10-year term. They're supposed to be above party politics and not beholden to one particular leader. Trump asking Comey to drop the Flynn investigation was a significant breach of protocol. In fact, some have argued that it amounts to obstruction of justice, which is the charge that Richard Nixon was eventually impeached for. And then a few months later, Trump fired James Comey. Initially, the White House said the FBI director was being fired for his mishandling of the Hillary Clinton email case, but then after a few days of trying on various justifications, Trump acknowledged that it was mostly about the collusion with Russia investigation. But if firing Comey was intended to make the investigation end, that gambit definitely failed, because a few days later, the Department of Justice appointed a special counsel, Robert Mueller. He is tasked with building a team to look into collusion and any matters that arise from the investigation. Since then, Mueller's been doing just that, and it's been reported that he's working with at least 2 grand juries to decide who, if anyone, should be charged with crimes. The most serious evidence of collusion that has emerged so far involves a meeting with a Kremlin-connected Russian lawyer that was attended by Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor. So during the setup for the meeting, Donald Trump Jr. was told via email that the lawyer had, quote, incriminating information about Hillary Clinton that she wanted to share as, quote, part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump. That should have been a huge red flag. Like, the correct response there is, I cannot accept anything of value from a foreign national in connection with a campaign, especially not if it's part of a foreign government support for my candidate. But instead, Donald Trump Jr. replied in part, if it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. The meeting that ensued remained secret for over a year, until July of 2017, when the New York Times published a report about it. Donald Trump Jr. initially said the meeting was about adoption, but then a day later said that the meeting had been about Hillary Clinton, but that the lawyer had no meaningful information. Even if that's true, some legal scholars still think the meeting itself was illegal, depending on your definition of soliciting and thing of value. Kushner, meanwhile, failed to mention this and also several other meetings with Russian officials on his initial security clearance application. He also apparently asked the Russian government for a so-called back channel that would have allowed Kushner to communicate directly with Moscow without U.S. intelligence listening in. Much of this is suspicious. Trump Jr., Kushner, Manafort, and Flynn have all been caught in lies about the extent and nature of their contacts with the Russian government. But, one, none of it is unambiguous evidence of collusion or cooperation with foreign nationals. And two, none of what is known publicly involves the president himself, except for him asking Comey to drop the investigation. That said, Trump's behavior toward Russia has at times been strange. As president, he had a private meeting with Putin without a U.S. interpreter present, which is extremely unusual. Trump has also gone to great lengths not to criticize Putin, and he has refused to publicly acknowledge or condemn the Putin regime's interference in our election. But none of that is illegal, and connecting the dots can lead to a very misleading picture when you don't have many dots. What we know is that the Russian government sought to influence the U.S. presidential election in Trump's favor, that at least one person in Trump's campaign knew about this, and that several people close to Trump had interactions with Russian foreign nationals that they either failed to disclose or lied about. None of the meetings reported so far involved the president himself, although he did try to interfere with the ensuing investigation. So that's what we know. What we don't know is almost everything. We don't know what was discussed in the meetings, whether any American accepted anything of value from a foreign national, and we certainly don't know if any American participated in collusion with the Russian government's efforts. Also, we don't even know for sure what a thing of value is. I think it's important to follow this story because it has big implications for the present and future of our democracy, but I also think it's really important to remember that we are living in the middle of the story, and we don't know how it's going to end. Now, if you're looking for information to confirm your pre-existing biases, you'll find plenty of that on both sides. But the whole truth, we just don't know that yet. I hope we will someday. Hank, we'll see you on Friday.
So that the thought that some external government can hack our voting machines means we need some more reform again, just like we did. I think that's all I have for lecture. I just turn it off, Bill. All right, so we're going to be testing out some forms of voting. We're going to start out with Viva Voce, who can tell me what that was.
Say what your vote is.
So we'll start out. Kidding me? start. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
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 I can't vote.
You can't vote?
Yes.
Alrighty.
Dogs.
Wow.
Dogs. Dogs. Dogs.
Dogs.
Wow.
Dogs.
I don't get a vote? Oh, cats. The dissenting opinion. Alright. Wow, this is... Waffles or pancakes?
Waffles.
Oh, that's already there.
Waffles.
Pancakes. Waffles. Waffles.
Waffles.
Also waffles. Waffles. Pancakes. Waffles.
Pancakes. Pancakes.
Well, pancakes wins again.
No vote again.
Waffles.
Waffles.
You sound so.
Alright, this one's going to be a little bit different. Imagine you're part of the Continental Congress and you're voting on the 3/5 compromise. Now, who can tell me what the 3/5 compromise was?
Slaves were like 3/5 of a person.
For every 5 slaves, they got 3 votes in the House. This was done so that the South could get more representation in the Congress. Now, we know today that this compromise was extremely racist and immoral, but it was a necessary compromise between the states that relied on slavery and those who did not. Without the Southern states' support of the Constitution, we would not have our Constitution today. We would have a different form of government, the Articles of Confederation could have been changed, or we could be in political chaos. James Madison even wrote in his notes during the Second Continental Congress that he did not believe those states would ever confederate on terms that would deprive them of that trait, slavery being the trait in question. So, yes? No. So just think, you gotta think about the consequences here. If you vote yes, we get our Constitution, but slavery still exists. If you vote no, we don't know what happens with our government. This is all hypothetical, just,
Yeah, no.
no?
I thought it was going to be that system. Well, yes.
Yes.
No. No.
Yes.
The noes have it. The Articles of Confederation. Oh, God, I forgot this.
Yes.
Yes.
No, either way. That's good.
All right, guys, give me an example of somebody who really didn't like the 3/5 compromise, but voted for it because they felt they needed to. Give me one example from history. Ben Franklin. Give me another one.
Probably Washington.
Washington, absolutely. More obviously, Madison and Gouverneur Morris. Remember, they spoke eloquently against it, but then went ahead and voted for it. Pretty much the whole Pennsylvania delegation voted for it, even though they didn't like it. Give me an example of somebody that voted no. They were so angry about this that they, and slavery in general, that they refused to vote for it and refused to sign the Constitution. Does everybody remember his name?
Was it Roger Sherman?
Roger Sherman, no, he actually was part of the compromise guy. He was a pro-compromise guy. He was in the Virginia delegation, and he spoke against slavery and then refused to sign the Constitution at the end. And Darby's looking at her notes from that movie. Did you find it?
George Mason.
George Mason, very good. And Edmund Randolph probably too. Okay? All right, guys, thanks.
Now, this is, I'm gonna erase. Now, this time, imagine you're voting for governor of New York in the election of 1870. You have the choice between, where's my John? John T. Hoffman or Stuart Woodford. John T. Hoffman is the incumbent Democratic governor of New York and closest acquaintance with William Tweed, the known corrupt political boss. His opponent, Stuart L. Woodford, is an attorney running on the Republican ticket. So for this, you'll need to take out a piece of paper and we're going to be voting ballot-wise. But could you please write it large enough so it's got to hold up in front of the class. Write your choice between John T. Hoffman and Stuart L. Woodford on your ballot. And when everyone's done, just pass them up to the front. Is that everyone's on this side? Now, I'm playing the role of Boss Tweed, the very corrupt man you learned about earlier, as I am the one who counts the votes.
Why are you even looking at them? Don't
What?
you know the result already?
Well, you gotta see. Stuart L. Woodford? No, I'm pretty sure this says John T. Hoffman. That's a vote for John T. Hoffman. Oh, look at that. Someone I can respect. John T. Hoffman. Stuart L. Woodford, not in my books. See, what's happening here, I'm the one counting the votes. And just like last week said, John T. Hoffman again, what are you gonna do about it? Basically, Stuart L. Woodford lost, and so did every other Republican on that ticket. The same happened with his first election too. Every Democrat on his in the election of 1868 won, every Republican lost. probably because Boss Tweed was fixing the votes. Alright, so. Next, we're going to be going over just our little review sheet.
While he's passing that out, there was another aspect of that too. What if the vote was not really private? What if he knew how you voted and you had a job and you were getting benefits from that political party? Might that affect your vote? What if the Democrat person in office had gotten you your job? You don't want, and those jobs could be, you could be fired just because the person in charge doesn't like you anymore, no matter how good a job you're doing. You want to make sure those people stay in office. I always wondered why people would bother to fix an election and risk going to jail. Mostly because it was their job. If the other party won, all of them would be fired and new people would be brought in. So they were willing to cheat.
Alright, who can tell me what a ballot is? Yes.
The medium through which people vote.
Yep. Now, how many people are normally in a precinct?
Like 500 to 1,000.
Yep. What does viva voce mean?
Voting by voice.
What led American voters to want ballot reform in the years after the Civil War? The excessive corruption found all over the country. What are the 4 specific components in the Australian ballot? If you know one of them, you can just shout them out.
Your vote is not private.
Provided by the state.
Yep.
You like go somewhere specific to vote at your time.
Yep. Ballots are given out at marked polling stations, 1 to each registered voter.
All for vote on the ballot.
Yep. And now next one. What does EDP stand for? Everyone, EDP?
Anybody at least know what
Electronic,
E is?
like the electronic.
There you go.
like, some data processing.
There you go. What is the coattail effect?
Just like a strong candidate, like sways voters to vote for their, like other people in their party on the ballot.
Yes, when a strong candidate top of a ballot, like running for president, vice president, gets it gives the voter or the people running on their ticket, so Democrat, gives them a better image. What does graft mean, and who used it to their advantage? Graft's one of the parts of political corruption. It's something Boss Tweed used. Anyone? It's obscure vocabulary, but it's graft is when you use bribes on someone. It's just a special name for bribes. And who used it to their advantage? Tweed. Yep. Political losses. Why were Thomas Nast's political cartoons such a big deal?
People couldn't read.
But they could definitely see the pictures that he was a bad man. Who did George Bush defeat? Is on the back. Who did George Bush defeat in the 2000 election, and what state was the deciding state? Florida. And Al Gore. Yep.
All right, I got a question for you. Back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, they used to have elections in Russia, okay? And Stalin would win the elections every time. He would win the elections by landslides. He would get 99.99% of the vote. And 99.99% of the people would vote. So everybody loves Stalin, right? I can't imagine that. So there must have been some way that they were manipulating the vote. How could that be? How could you manipulate the vote? You have an election, but you run it in such a way that